Today we're going to be going over the SAM splints. The SAM splints are going to come out and they're going to replace the Pro splints that we have on the trucks currently. The SAM splints were tried out in the field by a few stations. So the decision was made to use the SAM splints to replace the Pro splints. Now we're going to go over the different sizes of the SAM splints, the components, and how to use them. The different sizes that you will see coming out to the field are going to be the finger splint, the 9-inch wrist splint, the 36-inch splint, and also the 36-inch extra large splint. If the SAM splint is being used on the patient, remember, the SAM splint will not interfere with any x-rays, CT scans, or MRIs. Prior to showing you on how to use the SAM splint and how to set them up, we want to go over some fundamentals when it comes to splinting. Remember, every time we go and splint a patient, we want to make sure that we check for circulation, motor, and sensation prior and after splinting. The SAM splints we use for any extremity injury where you suspect an underlying orthopedic injury. Also, when assessing for circulation, you can also use your pleth waveform by placing your SpO2 sensor distal to the site of the injury. When splinting an injury, we want to make sure that we splint that injury in position that was found. If CMS is compromised, remember, you do have 2 attempts to go ahead and realign the injury. When immobilizing an injury, remember, we want to immobilize the injury below and above the injury site. When using the SAM splint, there's 3 basic curves. You're going to have the C curve, you're going to have the reverse C curve, and then you're going to have the T curve. Prior to splinting any extremities, we want to make sure that we check for CMS before. A couple ways we can do that is by checking for distal pulses. As well, we can go ahead and place our SpO2 sensor onto the patient's finger and check for pleth waveform. Once we're ready to splint this patient, we can go ahead and pick our correct size SAM splint. There will be multiple SAM splints in your red bag, as well as every rescue and engine will have a universal cell. They'll have multiple different sizes in there, as well as some ace bandages and some cling. So we're ready to splint. We're going to pick our size. We're going to take it out of the packaging. Now, if we pick a SAM splint that we believe is too large for our patient, we can go ahead and unfold it. We can go ahead and measure it. And these SAM splints are made to be easily cut by using just your basic trauma shears. Once you have the correct size you want, we want to go ahead and pick which fold we want to use. Anytime we go ahead and make a cut, remember we have some exposed aluminum right here. We want to make sure we make a fold in there so that way we don't cause any injuries to the patient. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and make my C fold. And now we can go ahead and place the patient's extremity into the C fold. Once we have the patient's extremity into the SAM splint, now we can go ahead and wrap it. Remember, when securing the SAM splint to the patient's extremity, we want to refrain from using Coban, as Coban will not allow any stretching and may cause compartment syndrome to the patient's extremity. So the preferred method to use when securing a patient's extremity to the SAM splint is an ace bandage. This will have some stretch to it, just in case a patient does have some swelling. So we always want to make sure if we have a fracture to the middle of the arm here, we always want to make sure that we're going to splint below and above the injury site. Now that we secured our patient's arm to the SAM splint, we want to make sure that we confirm that we still have good CMS with our patient. So we want to make sure we're still getting good pulses, whether we feel for a pulse or we use our SpO2 sensor to check for pleth waveform. We also want to make sure that we check for sensory and motion with the patient's extremity after splinting. If you notice prior to splinting in your patient's extremity, extra padding is needed, consider using cling or 4x4s. The EMS captains will be coming around in the next few weeks to go ahead and do some training on the SAM splints. As well, the crews can get their hands and practice using the SAM splints before you see them coming out to the trucks. As always, thank you for watching. If you have any questions, please reach out to the Medical Service Division.